Thank you very much, Carl, and welcome to this morning discussion, which will take up the discussion and the film we had yesterday. I think all of you, or most of you, watched that film, and I'll just sum up the main topic, the main thesis of this film. It was about the 1975 Helsinki Act and its effect. And the film presented a success story of these negotiations to end the Cold War. And there was a certain tension between presenting this success story during the film and the discussion afterwards, because the film did not very much elaborate on the losses of the Helsinki Final Act and on those who fought this conference, who fought this Final Act, because they were the losers. I have in mind the Central European states who had to accept that they will stay on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain, that they will be for more years to come, and they did not know at that time that it will end 14 years later, but it seemed to be for an eternity under the communist authoritarian rule. So this was an aspect the film did not make an issue of. And on the other hand, we had the discussion later on the actual situation, and while Brezhnev, the Soviet leader, was not presented as a leader of a criminal state, nowadays everybody on the panel agreed that it is impossible to sit at one table with the war criminal Vladimir Putin. And they did all of this for a good reason, but I think we should discuss this tension between a diplomatic success story of getting to one table with the adversary and the actual arguing that it is not possible to do it at all. And there is a good reason not to do it, and why the context is so different is one of the topics we will discuss now. And we have 4 participants to this panel, representing or elaborating on 4 different stories. They are from these 4 countries, but they could, as well as historians or professors of the history, argue for the other countries. We decided to make it in 2 rounds of 2 persons to have a more intensive debate. And the first one will be on Germany and Finland, representing 2 states which in the 1970s had a special interest in this conference. Finland as a border state to the Soviet Union, and Germany as a border state to its German neighbor. And the second round will be on Sweden and Poland. So then my 2 next guests will be Paweł Machcewicz from Poland. He is, a professor at the Polish Academy of Science, and he has been the founding director of a very important museum in Gdańsk, the Museum of the Second World War. And just when the museum was opening, the government changed and Paweł had to leave, and he wrote a book on this. Today we will not talk of this story, but everybody who wants to learn about recent Polish history and Paweł's view on that has to read his book. It appeared in German, Polish, and I don't know if it appeared in English. No.
English, German, and French, yes.
Okay, so, but today we have another topic, not this one, and to my left, Stepan Ingvarsson. He has been a counselor with the Swedish embassy in Moscow in the culture department from 2015 to 2020, and for 5 years he is now an analyst, a researcher at the Swedish Institute for International Relations, specializing on Central and Eastern Europe. And I think you will just start to take up the discussion we had before with your own short statement.
Thank you very much. What I will say in this introduction has evolved during the days, listening to you. It's a pleasure being here, pleasure sharing the stage with Paweł, because the museum that he created and I was fortunate to see in its original shape, it was one of the best realizations of a common European history, where you can feel empathy for those under the blockade of Leningrad, German soldiers in Soviet POW camps who are starved to death, Dresden, but also Poland. And so this was something unheard of, not created by any other of our countries so far, in terms of narrative and in terms of trying to create a history of Europe that is inclusive. And this will be my point. So please bear with me. We will end with Article 5, but I will start with literature. Because I think there's a direct link between culture, translations, connections, our mental images, and security. My background is in literary publishing before I became a foreign policy analyst, so I'm trying to bridge all of this in one argument. Poland is a blank spot on the Swedish mental map. Today, when you're speaking about Poland or you're trying to introduce any concept about Poland, Swedes, I mean, they do go to Gdańsk as tourists and they do go to Kraków and they visit Auschwitz, but they have really no concept of Poland. And because it's blank, it's filled with very deeply rooted stereotypes. Stereotypes that go back to the Enlightenment, when the concept of Eastern Europe was introduced and when Eastern Europe became what it still is on our mental maps. And you read all the travel diaries of everyone that's traveling to the East, we all know that approximately where the Iron Curtain fell after World War II, the roads started to become muddy. The peasants started to be more superstitious. Eventually, it all looks like Bram Stoker's Dracula story, where you're leaving the civilized London and you're coming to the superstitious, mysterious, exotic East. And the concept of Eastern Europe is invented by Western Europe. And it was invented, of course, when barbarianism was projected eastwards instead of north, because most of us in this room were, until the Renaissance, barbarians, maybe with the exclusion of those from Munich. But all the rest of us were treated as barbarians. And then there's this shift when Eastern Europe becomes a concept of this sort of degrading of Europeanism. So it's not the sort of Orientalism that Edward Said some decades ago coined. It's not this idea, but it's an idea that from somewhere from Prussia, Europeanism starts to decay. And there's an exception in this, because I think the tragedy of Poland, and in the eyes of Swedes, I'm saying now, the tragedy of Poland, of the Baltic countries, and to some extent of Finland, is that this exoticism does not have the exciting component. It just has the component of uninterest. So it's exoticized, it's in many ways less relevant, it's something peripheral. When we're turning our back to the West, to Britain, to France, to Germany, to the US, we're turning our back on these countries. It's almost as if we're physically not seeing them. But the whole idea and the whole mechanism of exoticism, where something is both dangerous, irrational, chaotic, and so on, but also exciting and appealing, that has been the privilege of Russia. And I mean, as a person who can speak both Polish and Swedish, I have experienced throughout my over 50-year-long life the reactions of Germans if you're speaking Polish or if you're speaking Swedish. Sweden is, I mean, the best thing you can be in Germany. It's just Bullerbyn, it's just wonderful. And Polish is, if not negative, then extremely uninteresting. And here you have the root of what Germans never dealt with their history. dealing. They dealt with the Holocaust. They projected, on Russia this opposition. But Poland, this territory of this bloodland, just remains uninteresting. And in a way. And I would say that this is where everything becomes dangerous, because if we maintain this concept of Eastern Europe, and if we maintain this lack of interest in Eastern Europe, and if we agree that the history books I had in Swedish schools, they do not include the history of Central and Eastern Europe. It's dealt with very quickly. Because, of course, Poland was not on the map when history was invented as, a European history was invented as a concept. We also have this curious idea of European culture when all the nations that emerged after World War I were not part of this. Russia was. So Russia has a seat at the table in literature, in classical music, in painting, and all of this. But all these states do not. And there you have the root for their sometimes comic struggling to remember, to try to remind us of Chopin, who was half French, Copernicus, who was half German. And this mixture of inferiority, because you're constantly feeling that you're not really belonging to Europe, and these sometimes aggressive attempts to assert yourself, which we're also seeing in Hungary. And I think that to some extent Hungary is also part of our creation, because by maintaining these divisions in Europe, we are, in a way, also creating self-fulfilling prophecies where this aggressive self-assertion is a reaction to our lack of interest and knowledge. When the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started, it was evident in the Swedish public sphere that we did not have the sort of connections with Ukrainian intellectuals that we have with Belarus. And here I would say it's clearly linked to translations. We've had a lot of programs linking the literature, but also academics with Belarus. We had translations, we had contacts. Every newspaper in Sweden had someone to call from Belarus to ask for an article, ask for a comment. Ukraine was unknown territory. We have, in the last 3 years, really stepped up. And there's a lot of activism going on this side, understanding that our support for Ukraine, which is strong, in the end is dependent upon our inclusion of them into our mental map. And if we've never seen a Ukrainian film, if we've never read a Ukrainian novel, if we've never met a Ukrainian, if we do not know one single fact about Ukrainian history, because that's true about the school books in Sweden, there's not one fact about Ukrainian history in them, then how will the support continue? So there's a direct link between the mental map and European security. And I think everyone who's here, for example, for Finland, it's not only about survival, it's also about not being alone. Because in all these situations that you described, Finland ended up alone. Just as Poland ended up alone, even though it had its so-called allies in 1939, but it was on paper. And I think so for all of these countries, it's right now not only about survival for Estonia, for Lithuania, it's also about existing on our mental map. Because Article 5 is a political construct. It's in our head. And the only way that these countries who are bordering Russia will feel safe is if they see that we include them in any debates on Europe, in any format where Europe is discussed. If we're treating this segment of Europe as uninteresting, and especially if we end up doing what is the ultimate fear of everyone from Helsinki and down southwards, talk above their heads in the old European empires, then NATO, security, European solidarity, the European Union will mean nothing. So I'm really trying to make a case here now that if we want to increase security, we also need to increase the understanding of each other, the translations, the interest. We really need common projects where we're really bringing historians, cultural practitioners together. This is part of our resilience. It's as important as right now investing in our defenses, because the arms will not protect us unless we are together. So my 3 final points. Eastern Europe is an old concept created by the West. It's the West that needs to change the idea of Eastern Europe. It's being abused and used by Russia. The effect of leaving Eastern Europe as a mental concept creates this explosive mixture of inferiority concept in Central Europe and these aggressive attempts to assert yourself as Hungarian, Slovak, Polish, whatever. Ultimately, it's about the cost of life. Ultimately, everything is about the cost of life. Ultimately, the danger coming from Russia is that Russia is a sphere where there is a consensus that the price of life is much lower than it is in every country that borders Russia. Russia is the border of Ruski Mir, or at least the world that Putin controls, is the border of a certain price on human life. And if we want to defend Europe, we must make sure 2 things. That the cost of life in Estonia is not lower than the cost of life in Sweden or Germany. That we are prepared to defend Narva. And the second thing is try to think about ways of hiring the cost of life in Russia, so that Russia will not have this endless capital to grind down into its meat grinder on the front line and threats to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I think this was very, very important. And if Joachim von Puttkammer were still on the panel, he had not only 10 minutes, but 10 hours, he could tell you about how important this interconnection between the perception and the politics towards Central and Eastern Europe on the one hand and Russia on the other hand are in German history and still nowadays. But as a skeptical by profession, I have to tell you that my fear is that this first, the perception of Central Europe, Czechoslovak, then Czech Republic, and Slovakia, not Slovakia, but the Czech Republic, Poland, and nowadays Ukraine has very, very much changed in Germany. It's not the ignorance you are telling us, which is still reigning in Sweden, but at least if you look to the academic sphere, to the political debate, to the intellectual debate, it has completely changed. There is much knowledge about Ukraine, and all the perception has changed. But when it comes to political action, it's about national interest, and all politicians will talk about the importance of Ukraine and how it is important for our history, that it's part of Europe and we have to fight for Europe. And even this very important borderline you sketched between Russia, where human life has no value, and the West, where it has a huge value, all this is, I would say, this is accepted. It was accepted for Central Europe since at the 1990s and now for Ukraine. But the impact on real political action is much lower than we should unfortunately think.
I'm trying to be provocative, Volker.
Yes, no.
Because we are at
right.
a very ominous point.
Yes.
And I mean, everyone who lives between Berlin and Moscow would say that the gas lines through the Baltic Sea were a clear physical example of how Berlin is willing to talk over the heads of those who are the former Eastern Europe, and that they are not partners in this discussion. So I would say Angela Merkel did not really fully understand this.
I don't
let's not get back into German policy. I'm just saying we are in a place right now where we shouldn't defend only the efforts that were made because it's evident.
Yes.
But try to understand what remains to be done.
Yes,
in terms of creating a history of Europe and an understanding of Europe that includes its center and its east. And I haven't even opened for the task that we have to include the Udmurts, the Mari, the Komi, big European nations, the Chuvash, more than 1.5 million Europeans. You probably don't even know that they exist. The Tatars. They are all living in Europe. They're European nations, many of them more than 1 or 2 million people. They also have to be included into our mental map. Russia is also exploiting our ignorance and lack of interest in them.
And I completely agree with you. It's my daily job to do exactly that.
And
this
I
is
know.
What,
so you become the wrong person.
No. This is what the journal is about.
Yeah.
But I think we have to think beyond this cultural approach and also think about the real politics, the great power politics. And if I look at the place where we are meeting, and the conference took place in 1975, it was Finland, and nowadays the peace talks are in Turkey, or peace talks, or at least ceasefire talks are in Turkey. This is symbolic. This is a shift from an approach where small countries without influence, neutral countries can be the place for such talks, and now it has to be a great power. And this is my point. But we will switch to Paweł, who could perhaps explain us why a changing view in Germany on Poland might be rooted in the Polish debate on Germany. Because you told me that you will shortly elaborate on instrumentalizing history of Russia and Germany in Poland nowadays.
Yes, not only that, I would like to focus on the public role of history in Poland nowadays and how it affects our perceptions of current challenges and our perceptions of our neighbors. So I would begin by saying that Poles are obsessed with history. It's rather obvious. I would add that, in my opinion, in no other European country, history matters so much as it matters in Poland. And in my opinion, there are two fundamental reasons for that. One is history itself. Poland had quite a painful and dramatic history, always being squeezed between Russia and Germany. In the 20th century, it was extremely painful with the aggression against Poland in 1939 by Germany, but also by the Soviet Union. The dual occupation is still a very traumatic memory in Poland. And in our culture, in our historical memories, Russia was always a threat to us. So we didn't have to change. We didn't need any Zeitenwende in Poland. It was obvious for us that we have an enemy to the east. And history always was, I would say, a decisive factor in shaping our national identity, our model of patriotism. But the second reason is more contemporary. I would say that Poland is now the country where history is politically exploited and weaponized, again, probably to a bigger degree than in any other European Union country. It started with the so-called politics of history by the right-wing Law and Justice Party. This concept was coined back in 2005, and the basic idea was that the state, the government, should be more active in dealing with history, in promoting a certain version of history, the so-called glorious image of Polish history. And the narrative was that our history is under pressure, under attack by external enemies, Russia, of course, but also Germany. For example, Germans were blamed for allegedly attempting to shift the responsibility for the Holocaust towards Poles. It had to do a lot with the discussions we have had in Poland regarding Polish complicity in the Holocaust. So it was in a way a traumatic reaction to all this new research about Poles denouncing Jews, Poles killing Jews. It started early in the 2000s after the publication of Jan Tomasz Gross's book. And the Law and Justice exploited these fears about Polish historical reputation by promoting in a very active way their own historical agenda. This so-called politics of history became one of the pillars of the politics of the Law and Justice. It was also exploited against internal enemies. So let's say liberal, left-wing intellectuals, historians, politicians who were at least to some extent critical about our past, about our history, was labeled as, non-real Poles, as agents of, Moscow or Berlin. And something which is extremely interesting is that nowadays Russia is our enemy. It's out of the question, and this is even not so much debated in any current discussions. This is obvious. But in the right-wing narrative, Germany is a much more important enemy for Poland than Russia. So in the right-wing narratives, the current government is presented as acting on the orders of Germany, Berlin, and again, if this is related to history, the Law and Justice Party puts forward this claim for reparations, wartime reparations, and again, this image of Poland, Poles as the most heroic, the most glorious nation is put forward, and allegedly the Germans are trying to subvert it. And again, this anti-German phobia is combined with anti-European rhetoric. The European Union is presented as controlled by Berlin, as serving the German interests, and Germany and the European Union is presented as those entities that want to dominate Poland, politically, economically, but also culturally, but imposing atheism, LGBT tolerance towards homosexuals, and so on. And this is very important for the current Polish politics. And if we discussed a lot, the Helsinki Final Act, the Helsinki Spirit, this is not mentioned in Poland at all. If it is mentioned very rarely, it's mentioned in a very critical way as a very naive attitude towards Russia. And the Helsinki Spirit, the spirit of détente cooperation, is something very much compromised. For example, Donald Tusk is being constantly attacked for trying to have a sort of détente with Putin's Russia back in 2008, 2009, for inviting Putin for the commemoration of the outbreak of the Second World War in Gdańsk. So the paradox is that we are facing the aggressor, Russian imperialism, but on the cultural front, on the political front, the right wing in Poland is presenting the European Union and Germany as our main enemy. And these anti-German phobias are exploited even nowadays during the presidential campaign we are having right now in Poland. And it was very effective in a way. It set the whole framework in which also liberal or moderate parties operate. Donald Tusk, for example, is very cautious in emphasizing, especially during this current presidential campaign, any cooperation with Germany, any cooperation with the European Union. These liberal politicians think that It's certainly important for us, but it should be silenced down. We should not emphasize it. We should emphasize relying on our own forces, rebuilding of our army as the strongest army in Europe. And one other point I would like to make is about how history affects Polish-Ukrainian relations. As you know, Poland was very much involved in helping Ukraine from the first day of a full-scale invasion. Not only government, I would say, but even more ordinary Poles who really invited Ukrainian refugees into their homes. But it somehow started to change after a year of the war, and history was again exploited in this respect. The right-wing parties, not only the Law and Justice, but also even more extreme right-wing party, Konfederacja, were using history, especially the Volhynia massacre and Galicia massacre, so the massacres of civilian Poles committed by Ukrainian nationalists in 1943, in 1944. It was a very contentious issue in Polish-Ukrainian relations. It started, the discussion of this issue started in the early 2020s, but it was somehow revived by the right wing during the war. And in the right-wing narrative, Ukrainians should first somehow admit their guilt for killing 100,000 Poles during the war. And this is the necessary condition for any future Polish-Ukrainian cooperation and for Ukraine's accession to the European Union and NATO. And again, this framework was constructed by the right-wing nationalist populists, but it had to be accepted by even these liberal or center-oriented parties. Even the politicians of the current government are saying openly that unless Ukraine is ready to be engaged in the dialogue regarding what Ukrainian nationalists did against the Poles during the war, unless some sort of contrition is made on the Ukrainian side, Poland will block the Ukraine's accession to the European Union and NATO. So as a historian, I am very much in favor of the dialogue, but I don't think that history is used in a proper way in this respect. For me, this is another example of how history is misused in Poland, and I would say that it's a sort of calamity for us and also for Polish democracy, that history has been misused by politicians in the last 20 years, and it both jeopardizes the autonomy of historians, of historical institutions, but it also has a negative impact on the relations of Poles with their neighbors, with the Germans, with the Ukrainians. And perhaps it would be paradoxical, but for me as a historian to say that we need less history in the public realm in Poland than we have now. Thank you.
Quite difficult to convince ordinary Swedes to support a fight for the security of Eastern Europe or Poland if the most important opposition party is able to spread Putin-like propaganda on the European Union, and the government party does fear to contradict. How to do that?
I mean, this is tricky, and we need to speak about the period of law and justice in power, because before this, the axis between Warsaw and Stockholm was a very constructive axis. So, I mean, in our policy discussions, we always feel that Poles, they urge us to speak to the Germans or to the French because they are considered biased by their history, once again. whereas we are a more neutral voice and we are very aligned in terms of European security. So there's the Axis was instrumental in creating the Eastern Partnership format for the European Union, the only way to. So it was created on the initiative of Warsaw and Stockholm. Then came Law and Justice. And all these stereotypes about Poles being superstitious, irrational people, dogmatic Catholics, they just surfaced again. And Poland was this country of irrational, non-constructive, less educated, not really European abortion, anti-abortion fighters and priests and, incense and rituals and saints. Everything that Lutheran Sweden has, for 500 years rejected. And now, with the challenges that we have ahead of us, we need to find a way of finding back to this constructive relationship, because the answer to our security problems goes through Warsaw. And of course, the Weimar format understands this. And the tensions between Poland and Ukraine are a European issue that needs to be solved. We must help the Poles in Ukraine resolve this, because it's a matter of our security. And I think that Sweden understands this, but it's very difficult to. Poland has the worst sort of country brand. The other countries that we fought in endless wars with, like Denmark or Russia, they are easier. I mean, the Polish brand is just not. It's in our head. We do not really know what Poland is and what it stands for. And that's why it's so easy to attach to it anti-Semitism, backwardness, irrationalism, something. And the general understanding that Poland is one of the very divided, polarized societies that we know everywhere, in the US, in Israel, many other polarized societies, and that our understanding should be that there's a struggle here between those who want to defend the institutions and those who don't. This really doesn't come through. I don't know. It's just for me the axis of cooperation between the Nordic, Baltic countries and Poland is where the solution to our security problems lay. In convincing Germany to do the right thing.
So one of my arguments when I'm confronted with exactly that, what I did, confronting you, is that you have to look at it like a inner Polish cultural folkloristic thing, which has, for people like you, concrete consequences, harsh consequences, which is very bad, but it has not a real consequence for the international behavior of Poland on the international level, especially if we're talking about security policy, but even if we are talking about the European Union. So this propaganda does not directly go into hard policy.
Well, I would disagree. I think that politicians became hostages or prisoners of their own narratives. So if the right wing in Poland presented consequently the European Union as an entity constituting a fundamental threat to our cultural identity, and if it lasts for years, it has an impact upon a constituency. So this narrative, this propaganda, and also this politics somehow shaped the attitudes of, let's say, 1/3 of the Polish voters. And you can say that it's important for the internal politics, but Poland is one of the largest European Union countries, and it's not unimportant what political forces rule this country. And let's say this anti-European narrative also produces such events as on the eve of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Polish Prime Minister invited right-wing, hard-right politicians to Warsaw. It was in December 21, including Marine Le Pen, and it was just the beginning of a French campaign. So it was shocking for many commentators that afterwards it was clear that the government politicians already knew that the invasion would start because the Americans warned every Western European governments about it, and the law and justice politicians organized the event, which was subverting the European Union. And of course, so far, Poland, both under the law and justice and under the current government, is supporting Ukraine. But we'll have a parliamentary election in 2 years from now, and it's possible that we'll have a new government, the coalition government of the law and justice and overtly nationalistic Confederacja. Confederacja is openly anti-Ukrainian, and who knows what will happen to the Polish policy of supporting Ukraine. So for me, this, let's say, internal narrative, misusing history, also somehow influences the foreign policy. The Law and Justice Party was very anti-German. It has frozen, in fact, the Polish-German relations for many years, and history played an important role in creating this narrative. The German state was accused of not, bearing responsibility for what the Germans did during the war. This reparations claimed was presented as the main issue in the Polish-German relations. So I think that history is intertwined with politics, and it affects both internal and foreign policy.
I can't really contradict. This is a personal experience. We just organized some years ago a workshop with proponents of think tanks close to law and justice, and we confronted them with the fact that their thinking is so close to the thinking of Russia. They are spreading Putin propaganda on LGBT, on Germany, on the European Union, exactly the same thing, and how this is related to their security perception, and they just did not really answer. So you have to contradict.
But I mean, these, just as Paweł said, I mean, politicians are trapped in their narratives in the end. And this was also what was happening between Stockholm and Warsaw during the Law and Justice period. Because when Poland suddenly, in our media, but also in our political rhetoric, is portrayed, and rightfully so in this period, as the other end of the European spectrum, those who are ultra opponents in all the key issues that we want to discuss in Brussels, with climate change first. So Poland is precisely the opponent. And then we have a change of government. We have a change of security situations. We also have a change of government. And suddenly we're very close. But the public debate and also the political narrative cannot change and adopt this quickly. So this is why it's what if I'm maybe missed making my real point, we need to have some sort of solid understanding that is not only influenced by these changes in government. It needs to go deeper into an understanding of Polish history, and it needs to have deeper people-to-people contacts.
Well, let me just use some vivid examples of the atmosphere in Poland and how Germany is perceived nowadays by a large part of the Polish society. After Donald Tusk gave his expose speech on the first day of his government in the Polish parliament in December 2023, Jarosław Kaczyński came up to the pulpit and said loudly, addressing Tusk, "You are a German agent." So he didn't say you are a Russian agent, he said you are a German agent. And there was this visit by Tusk, Merz, Macron and Starmer in Kiev just a week ago. I think it was a very important gesture. And how it was commented by the right wing in Poland. The photographs of Tusk and Merz were put on social media by law and justice politicians, and with the comments that Tusk is listening to the orders given by Merz to him. So, nothing about helping Ukraine, nothing about geopolitical situation, and really it is very much immersed in history, more than you can think. For example, the right wing is using such an accusation that the liberal forces in Poland want to make Poland a Russian-German condominium. Even during the current war in Ukraine, such an accusation was made that those politicians who govern Poland right now would be ready to somehow accept the joint German-Russian tutelage upon Poland. It's completely absurd in any rational terms, but it's effective in mobilizing the right-wing constituency.
Volker, can I give you an example?
Sure.
I mean, this was still during Law and Justice in power, but it hasn't really changed. I mean, Poland is one of the few countries where if you publish something that the political leadership disagrees with, they harass our independent media. And this is only done by North Korea, China, Poland, and Russia in general. So one of my editors, when I submitted an article that included Polish history, said, we liked the article and we're ready to take all the angry letters from the embassy and all the angry phone calls and all the angry bullying from the Polish embassy that will subsequently come after the publishing of your text. But I want you to know that we're reluctant to write about Polish issues because the embassy will bully us.
That's not for us?
Yes, it started with niemieckie obozy koncentracyjne, and then it has been the press department's main mission is to write angry letters to newspapers where they think that something is not correct or something not, and there's no respect for independent media. And Poland acts here like North Korea or Iran or Russia.
We, for example, did not have this experience with
but maybe,
Poland. No problems with Poland at all. For all these 20 years I worked with Osteuropa, we had the same thing with Hungary. In 2012 or 2011, just after Orban came to power, the Hungarian ambassador cited us or wanted to visit us, and we went to him to tell us that it's not possible to write about his country, this or that. So, but the floor is open for a discussion on this very difficult topic when our closest ally, and as Stepan, I think the Weimar Triangle is really crucial for the European security, and what happened is so important, but we have an ally which is, okay, we all heard what Paweł told us.
Thank you very much, the Polish embassy, again, and a very great discussion.
Will you correct us now?
Of course. No, but on your point, the thing is that when we see Polish concentration camps, then it's,
It started with this, but then it ventured into lots of things.
No. But I have to say that with Stefan, I agree and disagree. I agree, that Poland is struggling to create this positive brand. Yeah, it's been like an uphill struggle for quite a while. But at the same time, I think what you have been saying about Poland and the Central and Eastern Europe is more reflecting the situation back, perhaps, in the first decade of this century or second decade, and not now. Now, paradoxically, or ironically, the Ukrainian situation has changed a little bit.
Yes.
And we are present in the minds of the political leaders and debates. The struggle to be present in the minds of people is still going on, but the Ukrainian war, helped us in this.
I agree. I totally agree. But it needs to simmer down. Otherwise, it's
absolutely
too fragile.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. But on the other hand, the thing that you said about this obliviousness or ignorance of each other, it goes both ways. If you ask a Pole what he knows about Sweden, and we were accused of turning our back to the north, to the Baltic Sea, and looking solely to the west. Donald Tusk, his first government, was accused that you don't see us in.
1/5 of all Poles have been to Sweden. It's the highest number outside the Nordic countries.
Yeah. But they still know that probably Vasas were the worst dynasty in the Polish history, even worse than the Wetins. And that Sweden is a great society with awful individuals.
Let's go to stereotypes. Yes.
I don't really have a question, but I thought maybe the comment would serve well given the fact that we spoke
Introduce
about
yourself.
a polyphonic, more integrated European narrative. And I wanted to say that actually in countries that are Eastern European, like Romania or Moldova, that I know better than others, Poland actually has quite a strong brand. It's seen as a success story of integrating in the EU, of managing to attract its big diaspora back in the country, which are problems that a lot of Eastern European countries are struggling with. And yes, of course, the kind of right-wing politics have also been widely spoken about, but there is to some extent, Poland is one of the kind of positive models that these countries are looking up to.
This name was, yes.
Thank you. I have a question which I think is related.
Speak up a little bit.
I have a question which I think is related with the topic of our discussion today, but maybe not in so direct way, but I think it is connected. And my question is, actually, does Europe have any moral ground, not only firm moral ground, but any moral ground to talk about Russian crimes against Ukraine, while at the same time, the leading European countries supporting Israeli genocide in Gaza? Thank you.
Well, happy to answer. Yeah, I mean, in my institute, where we also analyze India and we also analyze China and the rest of the world, I'm sitting with my colleagues and we have asked ourselves this question for a year. We have allowed the discussion on Israel's response to Hamas attack to be a question of opinion, to be a question of loyalty, and not a question of principle application of the laws of war. And we haven't been able, we have as Sweden and as the European Union been unable to act principally and apply the principles that are needed to defend our credibility as upholders of this law. And yes, in the eyes of the rest of the world, Ukraine is now a European conflict. This includes much of the American political establishment. Is a European conflict that should be solved by Europeans, something that the Europeans have created through how they acted, and they are showing an uninterest outside their borders, so we have absolutely no interest or obligation to engage with their war. And I think we have created this situation. It has many factors. It's not only the lack of principled response to Gaza. It has a lot of factors, but it has escalated a divide where I think that we are debating here on Europe among Europeans. Would have been good to enlarge the circle, because I think what we really need to realize is how alone we are. Because when the US has left us, we are alone. And the other continents that we have treated, like the Russians treated Central Asia, they have similar feelings to us as to the Russian refugees coming to to Tashkent. They will not come and listen to our pleas that we're, in trouble, because we've been causing too much around the world for them to care. So I think first time in modern history, Europe is completely alone. And that's why the debates on Europe need to be very difficult debates on who we are and how we defend ourselves. And we are not a pole in this multipolar world that everyone else except us seems to accept, from Xi Jinping to Erdogan to Putin to Trump to everyone else seems to accept this multipolar world. We are it maybe in trade, but not in any other sense. So yes, the debate that we should be having is, what is Europe in this world that everyone else has agreed upon? We are the only ones disagreeing, right? Of course, we should always mention the exceptions: Canada, Japan, South Korea.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Jussi Koch. I'm from Germany. I would like to ask Paweł, what, just a bit tactically, if there would be a German government saying that we will go out of the European Union, we will go out of the NATO and make Germany great again, so anti-European things, what would the Poles then say to Germany? This question with the background that the European Union was a peace project, which, if you say it hard, put Germany in chains, that it does not get so powerful. What would Poles say if Germany would become anti-European?
Well, I think that Poles are not unanimous regarding Germany. We have 1/3 of the public opinion who probably shares these views of Germany promoted by the law and justice. So Germany is our enemy, in fact, in political and cultural terms, and this narrative is also to some extent ambivalent, because, for example, Germany is on the one hand accused of attempting to dominate Poland and the whole European Union politically, economically, culturally also, but at the same time the Germans are accused of being not enough, susceptible to the Russian threat. The state, the miserable state of the German army is criticized. It was criticized that Germany was engaged in the trade with Russia so much. So if Germany takes anti-European Union, let's say if AfD takes over power in Berlin, in a way it would reiterate the anti-German narrative by the law and justice. But I think that for the majority of Poles who are not anti-German, according to all the opinion polls, the majority of Poles are very much in favor of a cooperation between Poland and Germany. It would be a disaster, this scenario that you are outlining. And the problem in Poland is that, on the one hand, all opinion polls suggest that, as I said, over 60% of the Poles perceive Germany as a very important, ally, partner. But this, let's say, 1/3 of society has been educated by politicians in this anti-German narrative. But this anti-German narrative created a political framework and ideological framework, and it has to be somehow taken into account also by the pro-European politicians in Poland, like Donald Tusk. So this is a paradox that the majority of Poles are not anti-German at all. They are, friendly or oriented towards Germany, but we have to deal with those people who are strongly anti-German and who can weigh very heavily on the outcome of a vote. And the same with Ukrainians. Still more than half of the Poles support Ukraine, but this anti-Ukrainian narrative related to some extent to the historical questions, to the Second World War legacy, also had an impact upon perceptions of Ukraine. This was shown by various opinion polls. So it's complicated. Poland is very polarized, and you cannot say, I can't answer the question how the Polish society would react. It depends on with whom you would talk regarding that issue.
One further question.
Well, thank you. I was triggered by the phrase, I mean, we have a return of history, and maybe there's too much history now in this. And I think there's something in, and if you hear the discussion today and also before, and maybe when we talk in Europe in general, it reminds me a little bit of a sort of going to counseling, sort of trying to find out who we are. And you alluded to this. And thinking a bit further, maybe we need more psychologists in the way we do politics. And I was thinking, for example, in German unification, if we had a psychologist working with Helmut Kohl, maybe German unification would have worked differently, because he would have said, yes, I understand you, I listen to you, I see you, and so on and so on. And he can, but I think in general in European politics, maybe we have to use more approaches, more methods in a way also from psychology in dealing also with the past, with the present, with the world all around us. I think we are still using sort of 19th century kind of methods in dealing with political affairs. And in a way, there is not only a return of history, there's a return of nationalism, because that comes then after the return of history. So I have a plea maybe to think, can we use different ways of understanding each other than taking out the whole history thing, for example, the Polish-Ukrainian story I didn't quite know before, which was new to me, but how can you deal with this in a productive way?
So, very short. One.
Yes, I think that one thing is the reality, another thing is are the perceptions. So I would agree with the comment which was made here that Poland achieved a great success after '89, politically, economically. Probably we were never in a better situation as the state than we are now, taking into account, let's say, last 3 centuries. But the perceptions are different, and I think that psychology has a lot to do with that. Poland entered the European Union, the cooperation with other countries became more intense, and there was a backlash. The reaction of, let's say, those people who didn't feel so much safe being exposed to the cultural influences of the West. It had to do a lot with the position of the Catholic Church and the decreasing attendance in the holy masses on Sundays and so on, secularization of the Polish society. And also these discussions about history initiated, let's say, 25 years ago, this new research documenting the Polish complicity in the Holocaust. So it contradicted this long established self-perceptions of us as only heroes and martyrs. So a backlash was inevitable. But in my opinion, this backlash was exploited politically. Perhaps it was inevitable as well. So we are somehow struggling between the real situation, which is, I think, very good for us in Poland, notwithstanding the war in Ukraine, and the many narratives in Poland internally produced, which subvert this self-perception of success. And I wonder if you need a psychologist for that. Probably you need wise policy. I can't see in the immediate future really wise policy, because Poland is somehow deadlocked in this trap of that democratic politicians have to accept important parts of the populistic, nationalistic messages to compete for the vote, for the constituency. So this is this contrast between the real good shape of the Polish state, internally and internationally, and those narratives of, Poland being endangered in its cultural identity by the European Union, by Germany, and so on. And I can't see any simple way out of it.
I have a very brief answer to you. I mean, yes, one day we will face, we will, hopefully when this war is over, when Ukraine has defended itself and is restored in its borders, one day we will have to deal with the population that lives in Russia. It will not change. It will be the same people that are there now, a little less of them, but the same. And here psychology will be important. And I think it's linked to what I referred to earlier. We must support all the processes that increase the value of human life, that increase the sense of agency, the sense of individual agency in a country where Putinism has worked now for over 25 years in telling everyone that their actions and opinions do not matter, that it doesn't matter, that they're just small bricks on a big board game, and each individual needs to feel that they have a value, and how we support. I mean, only Russians can do this, but we from the outside should learn something by the mistakes we did in the 90s and try to support this process, because it's ultimately the overshadowing question of all of our security.
So my closing remark to this question of psychology, I don't see any questions anymore. Okay.
Yes, my name is Mikko Fritze. I work for the Finland Institute, and I have a question to you, Stefan, and thanks as well for your passionate introduction. I really liked it, and used, I think, the word mental map. And my practical question is, do you have any good examples how to get onto that mental map? Because I guess my work in the Finland Institute,
well,
is it maybe
this
Eurovision?
Is the only panel that still haven't mentioned Eurovision.
As I said, is it Eurovision?
In this country that is right now has lost it completely in terms of this final tonight. On a Swedish mental map, to understand that there is a province called Österbotten in Finland that speaks Swedish, this has meant a lot. So yes, even in the relationship between Sweden and Finland, two countries that are so close, there's so much to do in terms of putting the understanding of each other on a mental map. And how do you do this in a time when we're all looking inwards? We all start looking inwards. We are translating less. We are showing less foreign films. We're really less interested in mobility. We're trying to close our borders. So how do we do this? How do we keep bringing an understanding of what's important to others? What's important in this country? Why is it the way? Why is Poland the way it is? Why is it? It can be explained.
So, thank you very much. My closing remark to the question of psychology is, yes, it is a legitimate science for the individual level. If you are talking about, let's say, ceasefire talks, the psychology of the participants is very important, but I would really want to apply the language of psychology to understand societies. We are getting very close to this Putin-Verstehertum. If we do that, we have to understand the psychology of the Russians, why they do that. So I think, and it's the same for the Law and Justice Party. We have to dig into history and to confront the narratives with the truth, even if psychologically we understand why this is a hard job to do, but this is the only solution. And for Poland, I would say this is not a holiday island which we have to like, but we have to be interested in why this is happening, what we told you, and we have to understand why Poland is a very important, not only security partner, even if we have all these stories. Thank you very much for this discussion. Stefan, Joachim von Puttkammer, Laura Kolbe, and Paweł Machcewicz.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.